Welcome, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of a series of episodes focused on testing, software quality, and anti-patterns. Focus on testing and software development. As in the previous episode, we have with us the great Mateus Maravesi, a great software craftsman and developer, and also Julio Perrone, that today will introduce this new episode, and let's see which anti-patterns can we can we learn from or uh, put to the test. So, Mateus, please,
Okay.
and Julio, what we have today, we have a big discussion this week about some critical points. Should we put a for loop in a test? Yes, no. This is the polemic topic.
Um, yeah, that's a good point. We've been discussing that I think for a few weeks. We started this discussion a few weeks ago on Twitter, and yesterday it came up again. So I don't know. While we discuss, I think it would be good to ask for the people that is watching us what they think. Uh, should we use a for loop? And can I add like any structural logic or conditional to a test case? I have my opinion, but I don't. Let's give like 30 seconds
I
about that
will add.
because
I will try to
yeah.
put a poll. So,
Okay.
I
that
just made it. Yeah.
okay. Thank you, Julio. So feel free to vote. No bias, please. No comments.
Yeah. Let's see what people think about it because we have our opinions, but before we we say that, I mean, we know. We have a few examples around like assertions that we saw. For example, uh, Javier saw that Python, you have a specific example that could be a use case. So
Mhm.
we are going to see during this talk, we are going to see uh, examples of a different approach, not for specific for loops or whatever inside the test case, but we are going to see like different approaches that testing libraries have to this regard. So let's see. I'm curious. I'm curious about that.
Let's say that we bias a bit the question with the should we use is could we use. I mean, it's not that we should, no. But yeah, I mean the idea is clear that whether is a code smell, no, to use a for loop within a test case. So
so,
um,
so what people is thinking? What people think about it? Should we use or not? Do we have some answers already?
we have 80% no, 20% yes. What can we say, guys, about this? Python documentation is wrong, perhaps. Let's say, let's see.
Let's see. Well, I mean, I think that we should. It's a no as well, but I mean, it depends, right? So the standard, the default answer for consultants, it depends. But I would say, at least for me, I think that the test case should be like something that I should read as simple as possible and should have just one reason, simple reason to fail. And at least in my understanding, add this for loop inside the test case, be it to add in assertions or whatever, might increase the complexity or like increasing the more than one reason to fail. So that's I think what I would say. So what you found? Just before we start, what you found in the Python documentation?
I shared it
So
already on
you
the
share?
channel.
Okay.
Please feel free. Julio, you can check it also. Well, I mean, in the chat we cannot see properly formatted, but basically we are checking documentation of the fixture about logs, no, in Python. So the test is asserting that there is no log with critical level, no. So basically iterating in a for loop the all the records after calling the function under test, no. So, and I
Mm,
have my thoughts about this. This is because when I talk, many people said no, but you have parameterized, and yeah, no. When I, for instance, in this case, it's not about parameterization. It's about your result is a iterable or a collection, and you want to check a specific, or you want to do a specific check, no, on all or some items on the collection, no. So yeah, you have to iterate it somehow, no?
well,
Or,
that's it.
or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That's it.
So I'm just sharing. I think people can see my screen, right? That
Yeah,
the screen that
yeah.
Julia and I are presenting. Okay, so that's what JM is saying. Like we have this one. Well, okay, that's it, right? So sometimes we have these preconceived ideas. We know that they are not. We have our own opinions, but sometimes, see, it's something that we have to to live with. So that's fine. That's fine as well. So should we get started then?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go for it.
Yeah,
Um,
go for
okay,
it.
sounds good. Let's do this. Just if someone has any questions, feel free to ask. I think JM will also be on the chat, like asking. Feel free to ask during the talk. Don't wait. If you want, feel free to ask. Just drop the message, and let's see how it goes. So that's it. Yeah. Let's get started then. So thanks, JM, for the introduction. But if anyone wants to know any more information about myself, this is the Twitter. I think is shared already on the chat. But I have my blog as well that I write sometimes. Also, we have some things that we did in the previous episode, and well, that's it. And let's see. How about you, Julio? We'll just it is your
Um,
turn.
yeah, so I'm Julio, for those who don't know me. I'm also a craftsperson in Codurance. And yeah, I like writing katas, discussing algorithms, talking good things about Python, and
Eh,
digging stuff. How could I dare say something bad about Python with Javier here?
and by the way,
It's because I know where he lives, no? So it's dangerous if
And by the way, Julio has a few katas. He created a few katas himself, which is really cool. I tried to solve a few of them in a previous session. So if you like katas, it's really cool. And Catalyst, you can find the katas that he wrote. So that's a nice one. So today's agenda, just a bit of recap. We are going to see four more anti patterns. So this time we have Julio with us. So we are going to switch. I will discuss one, Julio another one, and we are going to do like that. And at the end, we're trying to do some wrapping up. So just combine everything that we have and share some ideas or what we got from this talk, right? And well, let's see. The first thing that we'd like to do is a recap. So first things first, we have already episode one where we talk about four more uh, anti patterns. So it's kind of a follow up on that. We are going to have more on this sense. But if you haven't checked, we have the video available. We also have the blog post that follows the content. And besides that, we did a small, how can I say, that goes along the testing, but is a different subject that is around assertions. That's why we started to to discuss the assertions, to have multiple assertions for or so we have a talk specifically talking about assertions. So this is the list, the 22 anti patterns. So we discussed that we introduced the list in the previous episode. We have some disagreement along the industry. We have some people claim that it's 22. We have some people claim that it's 23. So there's different. We are following this one. That's 22, which is seems the most famous from James Carl. We discussed in the previous session. We discussed the liar, the giant, the excessive setup, and the slowpoke. So the numbers are the popularity around the survey that we did, and at least a quick summary from what we got from the last session, just to follow up, because I think this is going to be something to keep in mind while we talk. Is that the most popular programming language that came up during the survey and the anti patterns were JavaScript, PHP, and Java. Besides that, we have the we got as well that practitioners that like to practice TDD and knows anti-patterns, they usually learn TDD informally. So we don't have these, at least the people that answer the question, they don't usually uh, have a formal education around TDD. At least, I don't think that exists a formal education. I know that courses around universities and boot camps, but I think there is no such a thing as that. So basically, that's I think the indication. We also saw that a few of them were related to test last. Today we had a good discussion about the benefits or the pros and cons around test last and test first, which is really nice. And last but not least, we have this we discussed in the last episode things around solid object calisthenics, non-determinism in test, and also the test pyramid. Okay, so just keeping that in mind because probably those things will come up during the session today. So for today we have prepared like four more: the mockery, the inspector, the generous leftovers, and the local hero. And around those most famous, the mockery is one of the most popular anti-patterns that came up around in the survey. So today we are going to tackle this anti-pattern. The generous leftovers is in the fifth position, and the inspector and the local hero are both combined in the seventh position. So they are not that popular, but the mockery is was the most the anti-pattern that people could relate the most during the survey. So today we are going to talk about it, right? Um, Also on that, as we are talking about anti-patterns, this is some information that we got from the survey as well. And basically, most of the people that answered, the developers, right, that answered the survey said that the places that they work argue that TDD takes longer to write the software and finish the task, or they don't have time, which is really interesting because if we have these such anti-patterns, if we are talking and if we are discussing about anti-patterns, I can relate to that, right? Because anti-patterns usually is something that repeats and slows you down during the TDD flow. So I think this series comes to try to improve that in a sense, just to try to avoid those anti-patterns in a sense. But I think this is a good information for anyone that sometimes see that usually struggle to practicing TDD or see that struggles practicing TDD. This is a common, I would say, at least in my opinion, this is a common thing that different teams and different developers experience that. Okay, so without further ado, the mockery. I don't know if we have any questions or not, but I think we can get started with, right? Not, I will just give the 3 seconds rule and get started with the mockery. Okay, then. So the mockery, I think this is the first. Let's say it's easy to relate because the mockery is the anti-pattern that relate the most, and the definition is that you mock everything that you're supposed to. You're mocking everything that you're not actually testing the code, the code that you're supposed to test. And this is interesting because mocking is something that we have we experience when we are learning any testing framework, any testing related feature, or anything related to testing. We learn often early in the journey. So, for example, to get started with, I have an example here. Um, and this is a payment service. So this payment service has two different two dependencies, right? We have this dependency here that is the repository and the payment gateway. So imagine that this is something that comes from the database. The user repository comes from the database, and the payment gateway is something that you're going to interact with, an API, a Stripe, for example, or any payment gateway, really. And here we have a function that processes this payment. So imagine that a user is doing a request and processing this payment, right? And this is just for example, so just for the explanation. This is if the user exists, we just return what the payment is giving us, right? So if we're going to inspect this code, so if you have pay attention at this code, we could have this type of test class. So we just mock out the first two uh, dependencies, right? Because we have two dependencies here: the user repository, the payment gateway. We just mock them out because it doesn't. We don't care about that. We just want to exercise if the process is fulfilled, if something goes correctly. And then we have the test case that is like processing for this specific user. And we have here the verification. So not the verification, but the mocking part. Let's say when we receive any call for the repository for the payment gateway, we just return a mocked response. We don't interact with the real object. Here we have these booleans because it's just for the sake of the example, but this is just what we're doing. And the assertion is actually asserting true that the payment, the process has been, that the payment has been processed. And then this seems a simple code, seems to be a simple, silly example. But if you have a look here, what we are doing, if we inspect the code, oops, and if we inspect in the code, the process just receives the payment gateway and returns what comes from the payment. So if we are processing, if we are sending, mocking out the payment gateway, we are just asserting into the mock. So for example, this is so for instance, if we have, this is such a small piece of code, but imagine that we have, I don't know, 4 dependencies or even more dependencies. It becomes more complex to track. And sometimes you don't see this kind of behavior in the code base. So the mockery is specifically for that. So you have this type of mocks, and you're testing the mock instead of testing the tricking the 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 system under test. Um, and then if you think about, so we Julia and I, we have thinking about that and why it should be such a thing. So the mockery, we have these mocks, and every time that we talk about mocks, we have something that is mocks, right? We just say mocks for everything. For everything that we talk about when we want to isolate dependencies, we just say mocks, 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 mocks. But Uncle Bob in 2014 wrote this blog post. Actually, this definition, the dummy, and everything like that, and he wrote this a bunch of definitions around mocking, and he defined this mocking stuff into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 categories. And he wrote that in 2014, but we had already these definitions from 2006, 2007, from the X Unit. The book X Unit defined these definitions. But Uncle Bob, he came with this. He brought this to the table again. And the mocks, when we say mocks, we usually, there is a categorization that is the testables that we are talking about. We want just to say testables and mocks as a family. Mocks, we want to say that everything like in this list is a kind of a mock. So we have different types we have a classification. So, for example, dummies. We don't care about how they are used. Stub, for example, uh, we just we care how they are used, but we just use them to trick some example here, like authorization, or don't go to the database, just return a fake data. Spies to see inside. If the object that you're spying on is being called as the way that you want. And here we have the true mocks, the true mocks that they call. That is, I would say the what we as developers we understand like these mocks is that you mock something and you verify the behavior. So you don't assert on what is the mocking is returning to you. The true mocks that Uncle Bob called here is to define behavior, is to check behavior. So you inject the dependency and you check behavior. So you don't assert on the output, just the behavior. And last but not least, we have the fakes, just to generate random data and trick the system like in different shapes and stuff like that. And then an example that I have here, another example on this the mockery and the anti-pattern. Having this in mind, this definition, this is a PHP thing. This is a PHP test file that just is testing out a release. So this is a service that packages different files and release that to uh, and create a release into the Git, and that's it. Doesn't anything more like that. Fetch the files from a Git commit, create a release, and generate the release hash, release tag. Sorry. And here, what we are testing is just throwing the exception if there is no files to release, which means no files have been changed in the source in the Git, the CSV system. So if we have a look, we expect a exception. We create a stub, and this is interesting because we're not creating a mock, we are creating a stub. And then after that, we create we assemble everything that we stubbed, which is the files from the CS, the Git. We create the assemble the package version. We set the files and we pack this version, and we expect that as this is a empty file, empty list of files, we just expect this exception, right? So uh, the next thing that I would think, if we think about the last definition, is the create stub would become dummy, because in this case, I don't care about how they are used. I don't care what they are doing. I just care that if I pass in this type of object, an exception is going to be thrown, and that's it. So on the other hand, if I have files to generate this release, which means a different code path, and I create a step which I care how they are used, and I have a method, I will return the file, right? Sorry, I will return this file because I care how the steps are used. So in this sense, the mockery, um, I can say at least here, I would list that we see these different anti-patterns on the testing, because one of the reasons could be this naming that we as developers, we always, we just try to say that everything is a mock, and sometimes it's not something like that. Probably an idea or something that we should be discussing, for example, for instance, is how we can be more explicit in the test code to try to avoid such patterns. Because if you start to name things differently, you could like spot something like on that, right?
So
Yeah,
I have
go
a
ahead. Go
question,
ahead.
Mateus, that
Yeah, go ahead.
maybe is interesting also for the rest. Going because you know my PHP skills are
Yeah,
really low. So we create this, we create the step, no?
yeah,
We
yeah,
have that step as file repository, and the method
correct, correct,
fin file is what we want to check or assert.
correct, correct, correct,
Okay.
correct. We are not asserting here. It's important because we're not asserting. We are just saying use that.
Hmm.
So you're just saying like return this when this is called, return this. If it was a mock, let's say, for instance, if you compare this with a mock, you'd say that when you return that, you would verify that it was called, like the behavior. If the behavior, if this code was called when I wanted it to be called. So that's, I think, this is the difference.
Okay.
Um,
So what you want
the,
to highlight here is the difference between mock, no, and stub, and how
correct. And the
they they are,
category, yeah,
they are used
correct.
differently, no?
Correct. In the categorization, right? Because we have fakes, we have spies, we have dummies, and sometimes, and we don't use that. For example, sometimes I just call mock. Everything is a mock, right? If I'm communicating with that other developer, it's just mock, 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 mock,
Hmm.
and hence I think this the mocker. Correct. There you go. And just to be explicit on that, the mockery. Uh, be mindful that mockery is not the library. There is a Java library that's called mockery. So using the library is not an end pattern. Uh, we saw that this was a Stack Overflow question. So just pay attention that the library itself is a good thing to use because it facilitates the mocking stuff and things like that. And so they are different things. Okay. So at least what we could found, I already mentioned that is the definition, right? The historic reasons why we have the mockery, root cause for the mockery. Could be different styles, historical reasons as the definition, why we are not using the definition, right? Why we don't communicate the definition that we want to use. Like if I want to use a dummy, I communicate that it's a dummy. If I'm using a mock, I want to use a mock. And this is also easy to face when you're starting TDD. I myself, I experienced that in many projects, in many codes base that I worked, and I saw this many times asserting mocks and going through this mockery anti pattern. And basically on the market, that's it. So now I would hand over to Julio to take control over the
Thank you, Mateus.
sure.
So the next anti-pattern that we'll talk about is called the inspector. And that pretty much is when you violate encapsulation for trying to reach 100% code coverage. And I think one of the problems with chasing that number is that it could be unrealistic in some context. I think that the one of the most important things is having meaningful tests and also being pragmatic. So doing things like we will see in the next couple of slides uh, aren't that really useful and could potentially be dangerous. So here, did that work? Oh, hold on. Sorry, I think I went to the wrong. Okay,
The
yeah,
next one. Yeah.
sorry.
The next one.
Start again.
There you go.
There we go. So here we have a test for an example, and we'll analyze it a little bit further and try to figure out how this anti-pattern shows up. So here we can see the bad guy. So in the context of the test, um, I mean, if we base ourselves on the name of the test, we're looking to see if there are no files found when we release. So why would the assembler have to set files to write release? So this not only doesn't really make sense here unless you really understand what's going on. So that means you need to have a lot more knowledge on the context and how the system works. But this also exposes some internal behavior that doesn't really belong here. If this is like an intermediary step that you need in order for you to do your assertions, why not wrap it around a method that has other steps as well? Or maybe even put it as part of your setup. So this could potentially be considered information leak, if you will. Maybe we could have a pool to see if you guys would consider having code like this in your test case, a form of data leak. So, and related to that, there is also another aspect, which is the use of reflection. Hold on, I think Okay, there we go. Sorry. So Mateus found this question on Git on Stack Overflow, and this person is asking if it's bad to use a reflection in unit testing. What do you guys think? Do you think it would be a good thing or a bad thing? From his question, we can see the reply from his supervisor. So he wasn't really happy, and he told him that the reflection is not really meant for those things, like hacking tests. So maybe you could modify the visibility in the production code. And we have a couple of examples here uh, to try to show this point, to try to prove this point. So here we have just a very simple test. Now there is something interesting about it, which is the use of this reflection API, which is the field utils. So I wonder, why would someone use a reflection API to write a field for an object and set it as a random value? This could be achieved in a lot of different ways, and you don't have to do hacky things like use reflection. And also your test is exposing a lot more stuff than it should. So again, pragmatism is king, and keeping things simple is very useful. I don't remember exactly who was it. I think it was another craftsperson for Codurance, more senior. He told me that you should write your test in a way that if your client asks you for documentation, you should be able to provide just the test file. Be like, here's your documentation. So stuff like this doesn't really help because your client is gonna get confused. And we have a little bit of more of a serious example here. So again, we have a test. And notice here that, again, we're also using reflection. But there are some things here that aren't very nice. For example, our test name doesn't really match what we're trying to do. So what is test square? Are we referring to a shape? Are we referring to, I don't know, the square of something, of a measurement, of a number? There could be a million things that we don't know about this. And again, this test is not very clear, and the use of reflection, it's not very nice. We're exposing some things that we shouldn't. And we can see here as well that we're doing some casting into a string. Do we really need to cast into a string when we're testing for the square of a number? That's also a point to take into consideration. And again, this is just like asserting for that string, which is a bit odd, if you ask me. What do you guys think? Yeah, so the points of attention for this anti-pattern is reflection is bad because it breaks encapsulation. And sometimes, chasing coverage just for the sake of chasing coverage. Not really a meaningful metric. It's better if you have a smaller amount, a smaller number of coverage, but your tests are more meaningful, rather than just having 100% coverage with meaningless tests or tests that expose a little bit too much. So the root cause for that, you could argue that it's lack of practice on TDD, and again, just chasing that golden number, which is test coverage. And I'll pass the ball to Mateus to discuss this next anti-pattern.
There you go. Thanks. I don't know. I think JM want to ask something, JM, or you want to have some question, or should we just follow up?
Well, just briefly, Julio, about your question, reflection in unit testing, 8 votes to never ever and 0 to yeah. So yeah, and yeah, the assertion I have seen it this. I think it's not the anti-pattern itself, but the asserting the type after casting in the previous line. So that's not useful, guys. But I have seen it more than once.
Yeah, and it's also it hurts us on refactoring, right? because, for example, it's difficult for the IDE or whatever tool that you're using to know that you're doing reflection on an object, and the string is is part of the class of the object. So how you're going to, right? That's the part that Julia said, like coupling. So you're coupling. If you change the implementation, you might need to change the test class as well. So yeah, and that's nice. We have a good audience. Yay! Keep it up. um, yeah, let's see. Generals left over. So this one, um, the the anti pattern. Sorry, the anti pattern for this one is around fixtures. So I got a quote from. We are going to see that in a different manner. But the basic stuff for this anti pattern is uh, when you create some fixture or when you need some data to exercise your code, and you keep that between tests. So you keep that between your tests. The anti-pattern is specifically for that. So it talks about having a test generator, and then you need that data, you need this feature, or you need this subset that you generated into the other tests. Um, so two things that you so this is the quote that I got. So uh, in this example from the X Unit book, which is really nice book, by the way. We recommend that, at least doing it when we develop this presentation. I think we said that we should recommend. So this is a nice book to have. Um, but the big thing is when you're generating data, or be it here is specifically on the database, but the biggest challenge is to keep it fresh and avoid the conflicts when generating and persisting data. So here the example is foreign keys in the database, but it could be anything. For example, events. Here is about database, or but it could be, for example, your dummy object that you like are persisting that. For example, you are using a cache to for whatever reason, or you're using files are a source as well of this kind of thing. So you're persisting a file, you want to read a file during the test, and you forget that you're using the file. So this is a source of problem as well in the generator leftover. So this end pattern is about uh, leaving things, the stubs, the data, whatever that you're creating, and you forget to clean, or you forget to exercise that in a state that all the tests would run if they would run in parallel. But there is another aspect of it.
Sorry, Mateus.
Yeah.
Alfred is asking, but sorry, Alfred, I'm not sure. Alfred is asking, does this also applies to acceptance test?
Um, it also applies on the acceptance test. Let me think. Um, I would say so. I would say so. The issue you're saying, like to persist data, right? To persist data across tests. Uh, it persists in acceptance test because here the example is, for example, in acceptance test, usually you set up your database or whatever that you need, right? You do a bunch of tests, and afterwards you clean things up. But the issue here is sometimes during the asynchronous or whatever thing, sometimes things doesn't go as you want, or some things tend to take longer to complete, or to do whatever that they need to do, and you uh, keeping this inconsistent between the next test and the previous one to finish. So if you have sometimes you have something that haven't finished, the cleanup, for example, haven't finished, the next test will have the same setup for the previous one, and sometimes this can be a problem. So doing developing the test, right, the acceptance test, this could be a problem that sometimes you don't have it. So yes, at least in my opinion, it would apply to acceptance test as well.
I don't know if you are checking the
No.
Julio and Mateus, the chat. Alfred is saying that sometimes there is data which must be present in all cases, so why not generate it once before the scenario and reuse it in features? The other way around, generate for the feature and reuse in scenarios.
Um,
we can go if for not breaking
Okay.
the flow.
Okay.
Alfred, we can go back to this question later on. What do you think,
Okay.
guys?
I think that's a good idea. But just to be explicit, this when we talk about anti-patterns, this is not meant to be to not use. Sometimes you need to do that to set up everything and do things like that. The only thing that here I would like to highlight is the issues that is how they call it here, the issues that you might have doing this when you need to debug or you need uh, to increase or to maintain your test suite. But we can come back later, as you said. Um, but not only that, not the fixtures, not only the data. I could relate that to this example. For example, when we don't clean up the tests when you are writing them, when you don't clean up the state. So, for example, we have this mock function. This is actually a, let's say, a true mock from the definition that we saw, that we are asserting the behavior. And we have this function under test. Could be anything, anything. It's just for the sake of the example. And the reference for this code is in the slides. So, for example, if I want to just test that this function under test has been called, I can do that in just for JavaScript. And then if I want to assert that it was being called again, I can just in this next test I can just call this, right? So this is kind of tricky. So for example, if I ask you for the audience that is watching, do you think that both of them will pass, or do you think that there is some catch into this test case? You just leave 6 seconds again to so let's see what is the catch here.
Paolo saying that one, not both will pass. Lisandro fail. I think the number of times the mock function is called will be wrong. Alfred
So
said that it will fail sporadically because
okay,
yes
very
does
good.
not keep the order. Probably Alfred is
Okay. So the as we were talking about, that's a good guesses, by the way. But as we were talking about the leftover, so what happened is the first one will pass, but the second won't. So it's kind of related with the data fixtures, like persistent. So, and why is that? Because we don't have this. We are not clean. We are not cleaning up the mock that we did. So the expectations that we have. This might be different in different programming languages. For Java, for instance, for PHP, for Python, or whatever. But in this specific case, the second test case would fail, saying that it was called 2 times because we forgot to add the mock clear. So if we add the mock clear, it says okay. So I removed the expectations, and now it's okay. So the true mock that we saw the reference is about that collecting and assert expectations around some behavior. So we are asserting expectations. So as we haven't cleaned the previous one, it maintains. And if I do that with the mock, so everything goes as it should. So well, we have started a good discussion about fixtures. Uh, But the message here is to not to avoid using them, but just to be aware of the issue that can come up with persistent fixtures. Uh, Also, sometimes if you don't do the cleanup in the expectations, for example, sometimes you're coupled to the test execution, right? If you don't clean up, test might fail because of the execution. And also on the persistent fixtures, as your test suite starts to grow, the it can become slower. Right?
so. I
Yeah,
have a question, Mateus.
go ahead.
So sometimes you can define the scope. I don't know if in Jest you can do it. The scope of a fixture. So You can sometimes say, okay, apply the fixture and tear it down after every method of the test class or after each class. So maybe this will be the strategy to follow. So be aware of the scope that you want to, but I don't know if in Jest is possible, to be honest.
That's a good question, by the way. Just if you do the expectations is function scope, if I'm not mistaken. So if you do that, this mock inside the function, the next run will be fresh, so you don't need to worry about that. Uh, but there are sometimes if you're doing like this in a sequence, you might face it. So yeah, you're correct. And the ingest usually there is this before each and after each that we do, but sometimes we forget to add the after each or before each, and we don't remember to do that. But usually in JavaScript, I know that is not a big concern in jest, but I think it's a good way to highlight how this anti pattern could come in the code base. And that's it. So, if you're trying to mix up different things, it can become hard to see the leftovers. So, for example, acceptance test integration. Sometimes, if you mix everything up and you depends on hard fixtures, persistent fixtures, sorry, it's kind of some source of issue. Um, and also, I would say this is some kind of lack of practice on TDD as well. At least I see this comes from experience as well. I'm practicing and see those pains. And I will hand over to Julio to go over on the. I think it's the last one, the local
Yeah, it's
hero.
so local hero. Have you guys ever seen that? Heard that phrase? It worked. It worked on my computer. So this is a perfect example of that. I remember I heard that once, and oh man, was I angry at that? I think it's unacceptable at this point to have to deal with these things. So we'll go over it a little bit. Oh my god. Yes, Paulo on my machine. Good for you.
Or right now is everything is Docker, right? So it works on my machine, or sometimes it works on my image. Yeah, I think this could be this could be a new one. But yeah.
Yeah. Are we playing this video or I don't know if you have to press play on it or thank you. So probably the resolution won't be the best, but we can see that well we could almost see that there are two environment variables there. So we'll go into a little bit of detail of why that's important. So here the tests are running for these particular scenarios, and we can see that we have some test failures there. So now we're defining this environment variable. Thank you, Mateos. And now the test should pass.
So, so
There we go.
sorry, Julio, I missed it. What did it happen? Because I don't know.
So on the first run,
Mhm.
the test case, the tests were run without defining one of the environment variables.
Okay,
So some of the tests failed. And once that environment variable was defined, then the tests passed.
okay, thank you.
So I'll hop onto the next slide. Um, oh, it's not working anymore. There you go. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, cool. So this is another example that we have here. It's just a basic React component. And again, let's analyze it a little bit further. So we can see that we have this survey, which is our component. And we'll discuss it in the next couple of slides. We have our reducer. I think you mentioned the Redux, right, Mateos, for this one?
Yeah, that's correct. It's just a custom, like a custom. not that fancy. Just mapping the user, the current login user to the state,
What a
and
man.
that's yeah.
Thank you. Here we just have our imports. And here we have, again, the villain, the bad guy. Can you notice something wrong with this bit here? Uh, you can see we have this environment variable defined here. So we either get the value or that's empty. And we'll see why is that a problem. So, okay, here we have our test. And again, let's analyze it a little bit further. So we have our user that will pass into this survey component that we defined on the previous slides. We are mounting our component, passing this user, and then we're just setting this loading state to false. I don't know if you guys could see it on the video, but that's the test that failed when we didn't define the environment variable. And this is a problem, right? Because if this is not defined somewhere else, then if someone downloads a repo or something, how can they expect to run this code? It's going to fail. So that's not good. Here we have our expectation, which is just to see if that button rendered. And why is this bad? So if you have your local environment already configured and you don't make those configurations available either in documentation or in the code with default values, then it's just a recipe for disaster, right? Because as we all know, when you work with software in teams, there can be problems with communication. And these little things, you would think that they don't, but they can go unnoticed. They're just unnecessary headaches, right? So having the documentation on point is a very good thing, but it's also hard to keep it on point because as your code evolves, let's be honest, who is always there like every week? Oh, I'm going to update my documentation.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen until someone is called at like 2 in the morning crying, having to fix a problem. And we can see that these type of things are common, you could say so. We can see, for example, this question on Stack Overflow, where someone is asking to test a file system. And we highlighted this piece of code. Can you see one of the problems that we have there if you were to run this particular test or function on a different OS that's not Windows? Exactly.
Yeah. Just
Exactly.
the bubbles before.
And people are typing fast. Thanks, guys. I like the engagement. So, as you all know, this would just fail, right? Um, yes. Yeah, exactly. Same thing like Marco mentioned, having the D drive instead of C. So this is not good. And Docker tries to alleviate this problem, but it depends also on the way you write your code, right? Because these are just constant pathings. So you don't want this approach when you're writing code that other people have to work with. And let's see the points of attention again. So we have file system and the differences of file system between operational systems, operating systems, sorry. The dependencies that you could have, like setting or retrieval of environment variables. I think, I don't know if Linux has it, but I know that Windows has different types of environment variables, right? I think it has one for the system and one for the account. I don't know if Linux and Mac have the same thing.
I
But
don't think so as well, but this is a good question.
yeah, that could be a
Interesting.
problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And external configuration, if your configuration is stored somewhere and that place goes down, well, you're in trouble. So let's see, what do we have now? Oh, this is the wrapping up. So I'll pass it to Mateus.
Okay, so thanks. Um, and let's see. So wrapping up. So basically, we are adding up to our anti-patterns catalog. So we have 8 already. Yay! So we saw the mockery, right? So now I would say that we all know the difference between the mocks, not to know, but a point of reference between dummies, spies, uh, true mocks, let's say, or test doubles. We also saw the inspector. So the inspector, I think we all from the survey, we all agree that don't use that during the test. Um, and if you're trying to chase coverage, because specifically private method or private property is not covered. So think twice or think as many times as you want before before doing that. We also saw like the persistent fixtures. We also saw something good questions around acceptance testing. The the care that we should have between resetting the state and keep like this the test case in a good manner to not interfere in the execution. And in the end, we also showed up like this issue during configure management, which was true before Docker. I would say it was common to see. Well, not before Docker, but I think to today it's common to see applications that just run in a specific setting, in a specific way, and you have to run the test and like that. So this is a point of attention, and not more. It runs on my machine. I would say that it runs on my image. I think this is the point of attention right now. Um, and I think that's it. So if you already know, we have this first chapter uh, available already around the first episode. So if you want to have a look, or if you want to just to see what we talked about, go there. Um, I also recommend, as in the last episode, this building a testing culture from uh, Codurance. And by the way, JM, who is hosting today, participate on that one. Really nice post and podcast and everything. So go there and listen. That's it. That's me. That's Julio. So hope that you had a good time. And if you want to talk more about how to not use for in a search, so there you go. That's it.
Hmm. We have
Just
Great.
a
joke. Just joke. Yay. Just joke.
question.
Really, really good session, guys. There was a pending session. I don't know. Asking Alfred about the acceptance
That's true.
test. I don't know if you want to talk about that or continue the conversation, Alfred. Which I don't know if it's here or.
So we'll just stop sharing my screen there, so then we can have a conversation. And the persistent, I think the question was around persistent fixtures around acceptance test, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if it was clear, but at least the last part, the last bit. I mean, at least as myself, I would also ask for Julio and you, JM, to give your opinions on that. What I see that is not to use persistent fixtures. It's just to be aware that they can become a source of errors, for example, during the test execution. It might be difficult to trace now when they break. So I think that's it.
Yeah. I guess. Well, Julio, you want to comment?
Um, I think the problem with reusing fixtures while sequential text tests that can potentially alter that data uh, happen is that it reduces the reliability that you have on the fixture uh, because again you have different points that different steps that are touching that data. So especially sequentially, that could be a problem. I think we had this discussion a couple of days ago, Mateus, when we were also mentioning async tests. I think those
Sure.
could be potentially dangerous as well if you have tests that interact with your fixtures and they are async, because then you just lose the reliability, right? Unless you program defensively for that. But it's just adding a lot more complexity. Do you really want to worry about that?
Uh, About that async, I suffer, and you have to be careful that, well, for that is really independent, no? That the use cases uh, are really testing things that cannot collide, no? Which is more likely, no? Or for instance, if you are checking databases that the entries are completely independent, or this kind of stuff. And well, I suffer of this thing using async in Python at least.
For example, another now that Julio said about async, for example, files, right? Because we're talking about databases, but files. Sometimes when you are writing, or if you have a sync and you're reading, sometimes you have the lock. So if you run the test, you have tests that depend on that. So it's potentially a source of error prone during the test execution. It could be providing the data that you need as well.
So I think Alfred is referring to those kind of setup, no? That is kind of completely stable during the whole test suite, and then you have, I don't know, to set it, and then you can keep it there. Yeah, in my opinion, it's possible. No, it's not. You can have these things that can set up some parts of the applications. Uh, you mock it, or you initialize it once, and then you can run the test on the application, on the different. Uh, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not the good practitioner. You are the you
Uh,
are my reference, guys. So
I,
I'm asking:
I think
is that possible, or I'm writing wrong tests?
I think the problem is not well. I'll say it, but careful with how you interpret this. The problem is not having a persistent data per se. For example, you could argue when you have a Docker instance of a database, most likely you can pass a fixture to have like default test data. The problem is altering and persisting that data across different tests that rely on that. So again, depending on your scenario and what you're doing, uh, you could have static data. That's not a problem. The problem is altering that data while other tests rely on that data and make that persistent. Unless that's your test. I don't know if you're doing like chaos engineering or something. But
which is, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you have that you don't change, that's perfect. I mean, you don't need to worry about. So use whatever you want, like a persistent, right? So that's fine. The problem is when you start to change that and forgets to keep the previous state and reuse or things like that. Yeah, I think that's a good point that Julio mentioned.
So, for instance, I'm thinking if you have the pool of connection to the database, the session, you can reuse that. No, you don't have to initialize, and different tests can pull from that pool uh, whenever they want. No, that will be a case.
I think there's one more question from Sergey.
From the surveys, let me check 1 second. Um, we had only two questions in the pool, so the reflection in unit testing, which
Oh, it's in the chat. I'm seeing it
is
here.
in the chat.
So he asked, would you mind providing an acceptable good name for the test square? So the problem with test square is, like I told you, imagine you're not a tech guy and you're given that file. If you don't know the context or you're not familiar with the domain, again, like what does test square mean? What are you testing? Are you testing for the square shape? Is there a particular square meaning in your domain or business? It's not very clear. So if you're testing for the square of a number, why not name the test test square of number or something a bit more readable? And I think he mentioned as well if there is
Eh,
a
Yeah.
recommendation for naming the test and special patterns. Um, well, I can speak for myself, but I think Javier and Mateos share the same opinion. Make them readable and try to make them related to the domain you're working in. It just makes life easier for everyone. So generic names are not really useful. It's just adding cognitive overload that you don't really need.
It's a good question, topic. Or how many times can you read the test function and you know what the test is about? That is the ideal case, no? Uh,
And by the way, spoiler alert: naming the test case 1, 2, 3, 4 uh, won't help. So, like, be explicit. Um, and this could be an anti-pattern as well. That now I'm thinking about this question, which is my experience practicing writing tests is that sometimes we, as develop, I myself, I try to when I'm writing the test, I think about the generalization already. I'm not thinking about the specific case. So I think I can't say like a recipe for a good name, but I think while I'm doing the test, I would say I start from the specific test, like as Julio said, name square. I want a number. I want you to square the number. So should be the number x times y should be z, for example. So write that, and then as you go along the flow, so you start generalizing that. So I think this is a good indication. So to start with specific, like concrete, and then generalize later.
Sergey is asking is a good point, no? Do you reflect the method name in the test name? Do you reflect the behavior? Do you
Um,
reflect both? Because it's also possible.
I guess it depends on what level of abstraction you are in the test pyramid. So if you are working at the unit test level, maybe your test name can benefit from being named pretty close to your method name. But if you're on like acceptance or integration, then the path that you're testing, the behavior that you're testing, can have this method inside of it, but there can be some extra steps around it. So I guess it depends on what level you're on.
I I see. What do you think, guys? If you put the name of the method in the test name, you are coupling, no? Because you can change the method name, no? It's not, but the behavior is less likely that it changes, no? But I don't know what you think.
You mean specifically adding the method name in the
I
test?
think I think
Like
it's what Sergey mentioned because he's giving an example. He's mentioned, for example, test get payment throws exception when payment is zero. I guess get payment is the method, no? So yeah, it's in the name of the test, no? So if you change get payment for get I don't know payroll or I don't know or obtain payment, I don't know, or maybe this is not the best. You have a coupling there, no? Sergey. I'm also asking you, no? Or everybody. No?
I think I agree with that. I think I don't see issues with the get payment, but I think I see different. But I saw like different code bases with different approaches and people with different opinions. Here, I don't see like the test get payment is the issue, but I see the throw exception. For example, should handle a test get payment should handle when payment TLS, I think I don't know what is zero. For example, I think the coupling, let's say quote unquote coupling, occurs in the exception because you might want to refactor that to not throw an exception. I'm guessing here. I'm guessing. So, but that's what I think.
So then the question is, do you have a method or because I don't have it, but maybe I'm weird here. You have kind of a strategy always. Yeah, for me, I think depends on the mood of the day. Sorry
You
for
have
being
strategy.
honest.
I don't have any strategy. You mean to name things? I don't have. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have any strategy. Yeah,
Test for every public method is good, or test for a behavior mindset is better? Hmm. Not really sure I understand your question.
good question by the way. People is coming with good questions by the way. One test for every public method is good, or test for a behavioral mindset. My opinion, personal opinion. Test for behavior, do not test for public interface. That's because, for example, at least practicing katas, right? When you want to refactor, what I got from this in the question, I think it's Shakel, if you, but what I got from this question is uh, when you think about testing method, every public method, you're thinking about unit test is about testing methods in functions. And usually this is not the case. Usually the unit test or what you want is to exercise the the behavior whatever you want to not couple. So in if I understand that correctly, is to test about behavior, not about the method. So if we have the public method, uh, at least I try to think not to worry about the well, you should test that, but not because it's you want to test, but because when you're exercising or creating the code, it was needed. So the public interface was needed that way to test. Well, think that's it, or should we close? What should we do, or should we, is there more questions, or I don't know, what should we do?
Well, I think everybody was really engaged. It was really awesome
Yay!
presentation. Sergey, Alfred, Paolo, Shakil. I think there were many people. I saw also Emmanuel around there. So there is another question on time, Chris. I think you will
Let's
test
go.
the
Let's go.
exception already thrown away. I was referring to the previous question from Sergey.
Okay. I think you test that the exception will be true, right? And you'd say the test is fine as a unit test. Yeah, but I mean, this is a good discussion because you're coupling the unit test. I mean, let's. I think the recording doesn't get this the chat, right? So I think it would be good to speak. So the answer to the Chris is saying like the answer for the question if the test should test get payment throws exception is a good name or not. So and he or she I don't know, sorry, but is arguing that if you're testing through exception is okay to have test get payment throws exception when payment in test is zero because your unit test because describe what you want. Um, but I think when that's the case, we are thinking about coupling the implementation to the test because the implementation is the exception, not handling the error, right? But it's just a personal opinion. I don't know. But by the way, sorry for such a long answer. There is a talk from I think it's Mauro from the TDD conference that it was I think last year that talks about that, like unit testing and behavior. So and it has this kind of discussion. Sorry for hijack the thing.
Uh, just for being on time, no, we don't want to take more time of the audience, and so it was great.
Sorry.
Sorry, I don't know if we have or we can answer maybe Julio to the Michael Ferreira question how to measure the value or Mateus, but
Go Julio, go Julio, go Julio.
I mean, it's addressed to you, but I can answer it if you want.
Yeah, let's share opinion. Let's share your
yeah,
opinion.
but
It's for me.
All right. How to measure the value of the test and what is being tested? Um,
How,
how to measure the value of
that's
test? Well, I think the way you can measure the value of your test is you'll ideally go for the happy path, right? And you'll run it, see if you have some corner cases, and then start making your test more resilient. But see if it's valuable or not. That is a good question. Mm,
so what if we left the cliffhanger here So,
Eso.
and you commit to answer this question in the next episode at the beginning.
Awesome
So
idea.
we invite all of you. Sorry, for the next episode, episode 3, will be great with these guys, and thank all of you for coming. Bravo Julio, bravo Mateus,
Thank you both.
bravo everyone. It was really good and really nice to talk with all of you. Check the links that we share and see you in the next episode for more testing.
And that's it. And keep testing. So that's it.
Thank you, Mateo, for inviting me, and
Thank you.
thank you,
Yeah.
Javier, for being the facilitator of this talk.
Thank you for coming. Yay. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and everything that you
And test.
test. See ya.
See you guys. Bye.